I love this because I think as if we live long enough, God willing, then and if our parents live long enough, then a lot of us are going to become caregivers. But I think also at the same time, if you're like me, you want to try to prevent the things that you see in some of your family members from happening to you. And I think when it comes to dementia, there's a couple things that I really want to make sure that you keep in mind. And one is that there are a variety of different types of dementia. And oftentimes you may go visit a loved one and you may think, oh gosh, is he or she losing it? What's happening? And it may even be just an infection or a urinary tract infection. So in elderly people, one thing to keep in mind is that when they have a urinary tract infection, it manifests itself. It shows up as depression, as being tired, as being confused. So that's one thing you want to make sure that your loved one does not have an infection. Another thing that you want to make sure is that the thyroid hormones are balanced, because hypothyroid or low thyroid can also present itself as dementia. And you'll be thinking, oh my gosh, I've lost, they don't even recognize me. They're confused all the time. And you'll take it to the doctor, they'll run some labs, and you'll find out that maybe it was the thyroid. So that's another thing that you've got to keep in mind. Not everything that shows up like dementia is dementia. And unfortunately, when it comes to our elders, they've given up on them. They show up in the emergency room, they're like, okay, here he goes. Looks like he's about to die, and they kind of give up on him. So what you want to do is be an advocate, not just for yourself, but also for any, older people that are in your life, is to listen, is this an infection? How's the thyroid? Have we looked at all the labs? Are their electrolytes balanced? Have we looked at that? So then on top of that, now I'll give you the example of like my dad. What we noticed about my dad as he started to get a little sicker is that whenever he was exhibiting signs of being really confused and just like, oh my God, my dad has dementia, it was connected to his gut. He would have gut issues, he would have diarrhea. The diarrhea would have a certain scent to it. So I say that to remind us all that the brain health is directly connected to the gut. And that's in your kids, that's in you, that's in our elders, that's in everybody. So if there's inflammation in the gut, if somebody has just really some terrible gut issues, whether it's constipation or diarrhea all the time, or just a leaky gut in general, one of the first things that we can see is a little bit of brain fog or a little bit of confusion. And if it doesn't get taken care of, they can become diagnosed with dementia, when really what needs to happen is there needs to be some focus on gut repair. So those are all something to keep in mind. Now, I want to share with you a little bit about Alzheimer's that I don't think we talk enough about. Now, when it comes to dementia and Alzheimer's, believe it or not, you've heard of diabetes type 1. You've heard of diabetes type 3, but what I want to introduce you to today is the fact that now we are calling Alzheimer's disease diabetes type 3. And so what I want to kind of show you is how dementia and your blood sugar or your insulin resistance are all connected together. So this is a interesting concept, and I don't think that we're spending enough time on it, because say for instance, your doctor has told you, hey, well, you are pre-diabetic, right? And so you're like, well, okay, well, that's fine. I'm not diabetic yet, thank God. So you kind of go on about your day. But what we're not spending enough time talking about is how that pre-diabetes or that insulin resistance is fueling so many terrible things in your body. And it's also doing it really in the brain area. So I really want to spend a little time talking about that. So let me share my screen with you here so that we can kind of dive into this pathway here. So what you're seeing here is, can you see that? Let me see. Okay, what you're actually seeing here is the hippocampal region of the brain. Now, the hippocampus is so important because this is actually where memories are processed. Memories are processed here, and short-term memories are turned into long-term memories. And what that really means is that, something can happen, and we need the hippocampus to be functioning in order to store that as a memory so that you can actually remember it later. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that Alzheimer's disease has been identified as the fifth leading cause of mortality in people 65 and older. And it's followed closely behind by diabetes, but let's talk about the connection that really exists there. So having type 2 diabetes not only increases your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, but it's the seventh leading cause of mortality in the United States. So let's talk about how and why, right? So when you think about diabetes, I want you to think about it in terms of there's type 1, there's type 2, and there's type 3. Type 1 is generally found in kids and people who are young adults, because what's happening in type 1 diabetes is that the beta cells in the pancreas, which are responsible for making insulin, they're actually destroyed. And they're being destroyed by an immune process or an autoimmune process happening in the body. And so because of that, there's just no insulin present. Now, type 2 diabetes, which is kind of the 90% of diabetes worldwide, type 2 diabetes is actually when your cells have become resistant to insulin, right? So they don't know how to use insulin. The insulin may be available, but your body's not using it. But couple that with the fact that maybe your pancreas isn't making as much insulin as it used to, or maybe it's making too much of it, and that's part of the problem as well. So that's type 2. Now, insulin resistance is something that you hear really commonly used, right? So when it comes to insulin resistance, really all I'm talking about when I say insulin resistance is basically that your body isn't able to use it. And that's what prediabetes is. It means you got insulin, you're making it, but prediabetes, your body is just still trying to figure out what to do with it. Metabolic syndrome is insulin resistance. Obesity, when you go to talk to the doctor or you're looking down and you see you've got way more gut than you should, that is usually insulin resistance. And it's really defined as the inability of your tissues to respond to insulin properly. So, and the thing about developing type 2 diabetes is that insulin resistance has usually been there a few years before it actually becomes type 2 diabetes, which means that a lot of damage is usually kind of happening in the undercurrent while this is happening. And then for some of us, you may have insulin resistance present, and then you may never get type 2 diabetes. It just may never get there. And you go and the doctor will be checking your hemoglobin A1C and just be like, well, you're right on the edge, but everything's good. And you'll walk out feeling like, whoo, well, that's good. Dodge that bullet. Well, actually, no, you really want to work on that insulin resistance. So because insulin resistance can be harmful for so many reasons, but when it comes to brain health, besides it creating that like brain fog, like you eat, you get tired, you get sleepy, then you wake up, you kind of confused. You're like, oh, well, where am I? Your brain's not moving quite like it used to. You're kind of stuttering a little bit. Besides just like those little short-term things, insulin resistance actually really increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease. So what type 3 diabetes is now considered is it is a metabolic syndrome, but actually this is where insulin resistance starts to develop in the brain. So normally we're talking about the fat tissue, we're talking about everywhere else, but as type 3 diabetes happens, it's actually a breakdown in our brain's ability to use insulin. And what this does then is it leads to a breakdown of the nerves, and then your body can't signal and process the way it's supposed to. And eventually, because it can't signal like it used to, those nerves actually start to die off. And the toxins of nerve death actually starts to build up in the tissue. And what you'll start to notice as this is happening, whether it's because you have diabetes type 2 or you're starting to develop dementia as a result of insulin resistance, is first it's trouble kind of processing memories, and when they look at the MRI, they start to see shrinkage of the brain tissue or atrophy. And what's happening is the nerves communicating with each other, the signals actually stops firing the way that we want it to be. Now, it is a known fact that people with type 2 diabetes have a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, they've isolated four genetic SNPs that are normally associated and can be associated with Alzheimer's disease. So these are genes. And the gene that they are calling the Alzheimer's gene is basically a gene called ApoE4. Now, ApoE is basically a gene that you get one from your mom, one from your dad. So each parent gives you an ApoE. Now, ApoE is really important because it's important in making a protein that is used to carry fats throughout the bloodstream. Now, when ApoE is dysfunctional, and if you have the ApoE4 genetic SNPs, it seems to be predisposing certain people and certain individuals to Alzheimer's disease. And so now, it's very easy to get a genetic analysis to see, do I have ApoE4? Is this increasing my risk of developing Alzheimer's disease? And if so, what should I be doing to modulate it? But keep in mind that there are people who have that ApoE4 who never get Alzheimer's disease, and then there are people who don't have it who can get Alzheimer's disease. So please note that genetics and having a single gene does not mean that you will automatically get something. Alzheimer's disease in particular is a mix between the environment, the environmental factors, lifestyle factors, and then the genetic piece, right? So when it comes to insulin resistance in the brain, one of the things that's happening when we're seeing this dementia develop as we're seeing as in type 3 diabetes is that you have a high level of insulin receptors in the brain, and particularly in the hippocampus where memories are supposed to be stored. So let me share my screen with you again. And so when it comes to it, we have GLUT4 receptors, which are important to transport glucose into the cell as basically an energy source for it to use. Nerves in the brain require a lot of energy. They need ATP, they need glucose. They can use an alternate fuel called ketones. So sometimes you'll see people taking ketones or people talking about ketone bodies. And so when insulin is in the hippocampus, we need neurotransmitters to be released, right? So insulin is important in the hippocampus, but it's got to be at the right level. It impacts neuroplasticity, or our ability to learn and grow new connections and form memories. It impacts our ability to create new nerve in the hippocampus, because a lot of the brain cells are mature enough already. They're not going to divide. They're just going to die. But in the hippocampus, we can actually create new nerves. We call that neurogenesis. And insulin is also really important in the hippocampus because it's essential for memory formation. So when insulin resistance develops in the hippocampus and in the brain, what we're actually doing is now we are impairing all of these things that insulin's supposed to be helpful with. Now it can't happen. So I think it's important, now that we've talked about insulin resistance and how it impacts brain function and how it can actually be the thing that makes you develop dementia, it's important to talk about what can we do to decrease the risks of insulin resistance leading to dementia, right? So you notice some people are selling, these things that you can wear on your body that monitor your blood sugar. Why do they want to do that? Well, they're monitoring their blood sugar continuously, not because they have diabetes, but because they want to make sure that they aren't developing insulin resistance, because they're worried about the long-term impacts that would have on the brain and the body. So one of the big things to improve brain health and improve insulin resistance in the brain, calorie restriction, fasting. I talk a lot about intermittent fasting, but intermittent fasting, it improves nerve survival and it improves cognitive function. Now, if you look below, I have references so you can look this stuff up, so you can read on it, so you can know what's happening. Exercise, build muscle, because we also know that that's going to help with insulin resistance, particularly in the brain. Cut down on the fake fats. We just talked about that, right? Cut down on the fats that are canola oil, Crisco, vegetable oil. They put that word vegetable in front of the oil to make us think that it's healthy. It is not. It is toxic. It is death. Get off the Western diet and try the Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean diet has been shown to improve cognitive function. Mediterranean diet is increasing the healthy fats in your diet, but most of your protein are coming from fish instead of some of the other animals that exist. So it's more of a Greek Mediterranean diet, right? Cooking with olive oil. Supplement omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids are so important when it comes to brain health. They're so important when it comes to brain health that I actually put our kids on omega-3 fatty acids because I want those nerve connections to be there, but I also take it, and brain health is just one of the reasons why I'm taking it. And then, as you mentioned, Eddie, coconut oil. Coconut oil, which is a medium chain triglyceride or medium chain fatty acid. Coconut oil is so important, and so many great studies are kind of coming from this place, because what's happening is that the body can use the coconut oil to convert into ketones or ketone bodies within the liver, right? And so the ketone bodies are then used as an alternative fuel source or energy source for the brain. And so it's been shown to help increase this cognitive processing that's implicated when you're dealing with dementia. And then, of course, B vitamins. B vitamins are so important. There was a meta-analysis done recently last year of about 95 different studies. They looked at the different studies that lasted over 12 months. And they looked at these studies looked at over 46,000 people over the course of 12 months, right? And participants who were supplementing with B vitamins, B12, B6, and some form of folate. I always say methylfolate, don't just get folic acid. Supplementing these B vitamins seemed to slow cognitive decline. So besides making some of these lifestyle changes and these dietary changes in order to help maintain brain health, because honestly, to me, one of the saddest ways to see a loved one go is when they don't recognize you or don't know where they are. Seeing someone who's just so proud and so smart get to that point, you want to start putting the things in process now so that you don't have to worry about that later. And then if you are caring for a loved one, put some of these things into focus. And then the one thing that's not on here, which should be on here, is gut health. Your gut health is so important when it comes to brain function. This is so important when it comes to our kids. This is so important when it comes to us. And it's so important when it comes to our elderly, right? So I hope that helps. Rubino talks about red light therapy to help prevent dementia. He's purchased a red light panel for the many benefits. Oh, the mitochondria, fantastic. Rubino, absolutely. So anything that's going to improve ATP function, that's going to help strengthen mitochondrial health, is going to help with brain function. And red light therapy, far infrared, near infrared light, the sauna, that's one of the benefits, is that they actually are helping our mitochondria repower and energize. And it takes a lot of mitochondria, a lot of ATP. ATP, remember, is the gasoline of the cell. It's like the engine. We need ATP to do anything, and the brain really needs a ton of ATP. So anything that's going to help support mitochondrial function is going to help with brain activity. Fantastic.